Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter, and I am a curator here in the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts in the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. I split my time with the Kislak Center and the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, or SIMS. SIMS is a research and development institute that is within the Kislak Center. We run projects, we do digital projects. Primarily, actually, my work is digital, but we also have some really amazing pre-modern and other, not only pre-modern, but we focus a lot on pre-modern manuscripts collections. And so once a week for Coffee with a Codex, I go to the shelf and pull down one, sometimes more, manuscripts, and I show them off to you. Because I know that not everybody is as lucky as I am to have manuscripts at their fingertips. So I like to bring that to you. I'm going to put I keep hearing the ding, so I'm going to put the first links in one more time. That first link is LJS 194. So here we have LJS 194. Okay, hold on. Okay, the person who just contacted me directly, I don't have time. I don't have time to do that. I'm sorry. I don't know how to do that. So I'm afraid that my colleague Amy, who is usually a secondary here, she's not here. By the way, I said in a previous meeting that Amy was in New Zealand. She actually wasn't able to go to New Zealand. She's now not here for other reasons. So FYI. Okay. LJS 194 is a collection of mathematical texts, despite what the binding will tell you. So the binding is much later binding. The binding is a 18th century blind stamped calf, and it's pretty nice. It's a nice binding for 18th century binding, but the manuscript itself is much, much older. So the manuscript is 12th century, and it is texts on geometry. Mostly, the most of it is one text, or really portions of a text written by the man who would become Pope Sylvester II at the very end of the 10th century, going into the 11th century. He died in 1003, and he was the Pope for the last 4 years of his life. So he became Pope in 999. So this was written between 1125 and 1175, so the middle of the 12th century. So it was written 150 to 200 years after he died. So it's not his copy or anything like that, but it was a popular enough text that it was being copied. So it was copied at this time. Let's see, at the time that he wrote this, he was known as Gerbert of, my apologies for my French pronunciation, Gerbert of Auvergne or Aureliac. And so if you see Gerberti here, this is his name. So this is referring to the person who became Pope Sylvester II. The manuscript itself is, I really like it. I think it's kind of pretty, although it's not beautiful in the same way that a Book of Hours is beautiful. It doesn't have any gold or anything like that. What it does have is it has some really neat large initials in red ink. So here's one here, and it has a lot of signs of use. So this was a book that people used not only in their own time. So if you look in the margins, and as we go through, you'll see many, many more of these. There are marginal notes that are other 12th century notes. And there are also much later ones. So 15th, or rather, let me get that date right. The notes, late 15th or early 16th century. So I have a request to zoom in. So let's zoom in a little bit here. So what we're seeing here is the main text. The script is called transitional or proto-Gothic. So you're sort of moving between Carolingian and a Gothic script. And that's what the main text is written in. And you'll see marginal notes that are also written in a similar kind of script. So here's another sort of 12th century script. But then there's also these, for example, were much later. These were hundreds of years later. So this was a book that wasn't only used in its own time, but it was also used in hundreds of years later, which is pretty neat to see a book that was used over such a long period of time. All right, so enough of this opening. Let's keep going. So first we have a prologue. So that's what this opening is the prologue. And then we sort of start the main text here. Here's another beautiful red initial. We have some more of these later marginal notes and then earlier marginal notes, even side by side, which is pretty neat to see. And there's also some manicules that we'll see, always sort of popular to see there. Claire says it's easier to read than many other scripts. Yeah, I feel like Carolingian is actually pretty easy for me at least to read. So it's enough like that it's much easier than some of the later scripts. All right, so here's a little more. And they were not shy about writing all over. This was a book that was being used and engaged with in a way that's really exciting, I think. You're going to see, particularly at the bottom, there are these little dots. These are red dots, and then sometimes there's also dark ink that goes along with it. In a few places, maybe coming up a little bit later. Yeah, here's one. I'll go back. You'll see that it's sort of like there's something down there. These were, I think, showing that there's text missing or some kind of note to put it in. And so clearly these have been cut away. So at some point, and we'll also see it in the marginal notes. So we know that the book was rebound at least once, because it was rebound because the binding that we have is 18th century. So it was also trimmed, which is something that happened a lot. And it's really a shame that it seems like it's cut quite a lot, right? Like I could see the manuscript originally being sort of much bigger than that. So it was made smaller, which is too bad, but it is a thing that happens. All right. So I put a note here because this is where, so we have this section. I'm not sure entirely what's happening, but there's some pretty neat little diagrams in the margins. I don't know if these were original or if they were added. Maybe someone was reading it and was making diagrams sort of based on what's in there. This one, it looks like there's a contemporary letter H, which makes you think that this might have been original. What's kind of important is that, oh yes, Lisa says they are original and directly connect to the text. But in the planning of the book, there wasn't room sort of left. Sometimes you'll see, and I think when we get later in the book, we'll see places where space was left for diagrams to be put in. And in this case, they weren't, they were just drawn, added in the margins, which is sort of neat. So here is the section on measurement, mensurarum. So we've got our measurement section, a beautiful initial M to start that out. And here is another example of a note at the bottom that has been cut off here, and just the very, very tippy top exists. Let's see, the tiny symbol of, this is Lisa Fagan Davis again. She says the tiny symbol above the one to the right cross references to the same symbol above describi. So let's see. Oh, yep, there we go. Here's describi with the little, you all see that little, and it connects there. And this is the same kind of kind of notation that we also see for text. In fact, no, I don't think so. But if we look actually over here, there's another one, I think. But sometimes when there's text that's been added as a note, you will see these kinds of things being used there. Okay, let's keep going. Just a lot of notes. And let's see, what will we get? Here we have later hands that are going through, and it looks like instead of adding sort of longer notes, it almost looks like they're glossing terms, which might be, I know that in this text, Gerbert uses a lot of Greek terms when later we use Latin terms. And so it might be, that might be what's happening there. I'm not sure. Okay, here is, you've all seen this because we love to use this initial because it's so neat. It might be the only zoomorphic one that's in here, but we have a little dragon, our little red dragon, which is pretty fun. And more, more notes that have been cut away. Here we can see, in addition to the marginal notes, there are also interlinear notes that have been added between the lines, so interlinear between the lines there. Right, and I'll also point it out just because I keep noticing it, between and you'll see it on a lot of the pages here, it's like there's been some kind of damage and other parchment has been put in. This has been done before the text was written, because the text is actually written over the parchment. There's letters written there. And you can see it really well here. There's a note that, sorry, the focus is not great. Come on, focus on where I want you to focus. Focus there. There we go. You can see that little note has been written over the patch. So the parchment was maybe to begin with even not the best quality. It's been patched. They've written on it anyway, which just means that this was, again, not designed to be a fancy, oh no, what have I done? All right, this is me. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so here we are back. We've got our zoomorphic initial, not high quality parchment. I think that's about where I was. So here's another one of these. And all of this, most of the manuscript is the geometrical text. And then at the very end, we have one quire of different texts, and I'll say more about that when we get there. But every initial that we see here, these large initials, are introducing new sections of the planus figuris. So now we're talking about different kinds of figures. And here we're getting to circles. I know that we're getting to circles because there's lots of circles here and some interesting diagrams in terms of overlap and other things. We're starting to get some angles over here. But we're going to get even more angles later on. So here's more angles. We're getting triangles, triangulus. So here's our new section on triangles, and we have triangles fitting into boxes. And I don't know how many of you took math, took geometry in school, but a lot of this is really familiar here. I want to go back and say that Lisa has pointed out that you can see the holes. That's what these are, is the holes that the compass made to draw the circles. Yes, and Katie says, I love the T. That's a very nice T there, the T in triangulus. All right. So moving on, here are even more triangles. He is, I believe he's defining different types of triangles here. I did a little lookup and let me see if I can find it. So we have isopleurorus, which is same-sided. So this triangle has the same sides. This is isosceles, which is a term that I'm actually familiar with, which means that two sides are the same. So you can see here, these two sides are longer and then the one on the bottom is shorter. And then skelenos, no sides the same. So three different ones. So here's where he's talking about those. So again, these are sort of things that are still familiar to us in the study of geometry. All right. Keep moving. I can't believe it's 2:18 and we're only on folio 14. Okay. Oh, here, this is fun. Lots of triangles there in the margins. He's very interested in triangles. And a lot of notes too. So you can sort of see what the readers are which sections are more interesting to the readers and at what time. So there's a whole lot going on folio 17, 17 recto. Let's see. Keep going. Let's see. I meant to look at the structure. Ooh, that's a nice F. I like these big letters. But I want to say that there are 8 choirs. And then we'll get there, more of these diagrams. So this is sort of interesting. This initial does not really look like the other initials. I think that someone came along and added that. I don't know if Lisa wants to say anything about this, but it does not look as nice as the others, and clearly it's not that red ink. So it may be that there was a blank space there, and someone left it there. It might also be later, or a different hand. It looks like that's a different hand. Interestingly, this piece of text here is actually, yeah, probably a later addition to a blank space. This whole text is repeated at the very end too, which is sort of interesting to think about how that happened. More of these. I like the way I noticed it earlier too, that some of because the way this would have been written is the dark ink would have been written first and then spaces would have been left. And then the larger initials and the rubrics, that is the red writing, came in later. And it looks like there wasn't always enough space. So you have rubrics which are sort of titles going off and then having to be written. It's happening over here too, written down the side to make space for it, which is sort of interesting. Yes, Martha says it's a beautiful G there. Yeah, Anne asks, I missed the beginning, so I may have missed by whom was this book used? I didn't actually say that as clearly as Lisa has just said it in the meeting chat, that it was likely written in a monastic scriptorium as a school text. So which is one of the reasons why it looks the way it does in terms of not being a very fancy book, and also having notations all over it, even from contemporary notes on it. Computina. So we're moving on to some other things. Let's see. Ooh, I do want to get to the end though, so I'll move this a little bit faster, because there's some sort of interesting stuff that happens structurally. here. So we're still, this is all still Gerbert's text. And we're seeing here, I didn't see this so much at the beginning, except for the patching in the middle. But what we're seeing is signs of animal, the fact that the parchment is made of animals. So we're seeing some holes that would have been made when the parchment, when the skin was stretched. And this is some kind of edge of the animal. So it's sort of just reminding us that where this material came from. And there's another hole there. Yeah, and Joyce points out that back where the G appears to be a different script, I think it's a different script too, or a different hand. So it may have been someone practicing a little bit, I'm not sure. All right, so let's get to the end of this section. We're having more circles here. I don't want to miss any. I want to get to the end, but I also don't want to miss anything. Here's a nice note written down the edge of the page, which is something, and someone else has come through and sort of numbered these. I didn't notice that earlier, but they've been numbering these sections there. All right, so here is the end of the text, the text on geometry, and on the right we have a letter from Gerbert to Adelbaldus, which is about the area of triangles. So this is the author of the text writing a letter to someone else about the area of triangles. But this isn't the start of the letter. Part of the letter is missing. And the text actually cuts out in the middle of, like, there's a word and it's in the middle of a sentence. This also happens to be moving from one choir to another. So there's something missing here. There's at least a choir, and both of these choirs are whole, which means that there was a choir being a set of folded sheets that were bound in, that were taken out. Whether that happened, at what point that happened is kind of impossible to say, impossible to know. But it's interesting that it's there. It certainly happened before it was bound in this binding, because the binding is all together. Okay, so now we've got our last choir of 8 leaves, has some other kinds of texts in it. But I also want to point that this has also been patched. I pointed out that there was a parchment patch towards the beginning. And it also happens here, and this is interesting because there's actually writing on some of this patch. So we'll see if we can see that as we come through. It's also starting to come apart. So he's talking about the areas of triangles. He's also got some circles, but here's this. But I want to point out there's a little line there. This is the same ink that's used on the large initials in the other parts of the manuscript. And somehow it's been put in as a patch here. And this is plain. And it looks like this patch was put in later because it covers the text. Earlier on, there was text that was sort of over the patch. And in this place, it is, let me see, I'll zoom in so you can see that a little better. It's under the patch here. I also want to point out, I was talking about earlier the diagrams. Here's a place where there was space left for a diagram, and the diagram was put in. So there is that happening. And then we have the end of the letter, and then a second letter, which is Adelbaldus replying to Gerbert. So they're actually having a dialogue here in this book, which is this is something that, was the way that medieval intellectual life worked. Here's my treatise, here's some letters, they write me back, and then they end up getting copied on for future study. All right, and then we have another treatise on geometry. This one is, I think, the author is not identified, but here it is. And here's this patch is making me a little bit nuts, because if you zoom in, we're now in the middle of the choir. and you can see there's contemporary, there's a contemporary word here, and then there's what looks like later writing. And so this is making me think that at some later point, maybe when this was bound in the 18th century, that they used existing parchment to patch this up, which is sort of an interesting thing to do. Let's see, there's a couple of notes in the chat. Martha, it's interesting that a compass was used for the circles, but all other shapes, triangles and rectangles, seem to be hand-drawn. Yeah, some of the lines aren't really that straight. So that is interesting to think about how they made that decision. And then Chris says some of the diagrams look like the same hand/ink as the initial G. Yeah, which I think that was contemporary, but somebody else. So I think it's just that there were, on some level, there were just lots of hands on this book. All right, and this is Treatise on the Construction of an Astrolabe. So the astrolabe was used to sort of track stars across the sky. I didn't include a link, but a while back I did one on the astrolabe. I actually made a little fake astrolabe and tried it out. That was pretty neat. So that's what is happening here. And the astrolabe itself as an object would have different discs, usually made of metal, that you could stack up and then compare it to the sky and sort of figure stuff out is as far as I'm capable of saying. It was easier when I had the astrolabe in front of me. That's what's happening here. And then the very last one, let me see. So that the astrolabe goes through here, and then we get to the end. And then here we have more added texts. And this is the text that's the same as the one that is up here with this G. So it's the same text. Clearly, this one doesn't have the initial. There was a space left and nobody filled it in. And we've got more of this patch that has the orange or red initial there. So this is the copy of that, of the text that's there. And then there's sort of more notes that have been added, just a couple of other additions. And again, these have been, or this one has an initial. So this might be student, practice of student writing, or I don't know. The record doesn't say what exactly they are. So it's, so I don't really know. And that's it. There's a Phillips stamp. There might be. So this was, well, here's a note. This manuscript was owned by Sir Thomas Phillips, who owned some other manuscripts in our collection. He owned an obscene number of books. But I don't see a stamp. I see other notes, but it certainly was in his possession, which is also interesting, because so many books went through there. So that is LJS 194, a little bit of geometry for your afternoon, mid 13th century, which is pretty early, pretty neat. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll come next week or in future weeks. You already have your link and your password, so you're good to go. So I hope you all have a fantastic week, and I'll see you again soon.